Hello and welcome back to Parc Fermé Parlay with Kieran Downey. We have had 3 competitive sessions of the Chinese Grand Prix weekend. We've had sprint quali, the sprint race and the qualifying session for the main race. And we're here to get into the big moments from each of these 3 sessions. With the time difference of the Chinese Grand Prix to where we are in the UK, it means that the sprint qualifying happened right as I was about to leave for work. So I managed to catch it but didn't have enough time to record. So we're going to get into everything. We're going to sort of encapsulate everything. Our main talking point is going to be the qualifying session that has just happened, but we will also touch on the talking points from the sprint race and a little tiny bit about sprint qualifying. Now, getting into qualifying session and out in Q1 was in P20 Liam Lawson, Gabriel Bortoleto, Jack Doohan, Oliver Bearman, and in P16, Pierre Gasly. All right, kicking things off with the Alpine pair, I am quite surprised to see Pierre Gasly in P16. He missed out getting into Q2 by about half a tenth. Now, as we know, the pack is incredibly tight. There is nothing pretty much that separates any of these drivers, and I do feel that it is probably just a bit unfortunate. A lot of the drivers really struggle to hook up clean laps. I don't think anyone throughout the sprint qualifying or this qualifying session actually put together a proper perfect lap. I don't think you ever really get a perfect lap, but not many drivers came close to it today. And I do think it is just a bit unfortunate that Gasly is out where he is. I will say that Gasly's race pace does seem a lot stronger than his qualifying pace. Probably similar for Jack Doohan. He did manage to be a little bit competitive within the sprint race. His qualifying pace was poor. I do think that the mistake he made at the beginning of Q1, where he sort of put a little bit too much into the acceleration and sort of lost control of the rear of the car and spun off, might have knocked his confidence a little bit, which meant that it was more likely that he would make a mistake in the sort of back end of the session, which he did on his final flying lap. He made a mistake around the final corner, and that mistake really sacrificed his time. So I'm not surprised that Doohan is where he is, to be quite honest with you. He did have a little bit of a moment going into the hairpin, the final hairpin during the sprint, where he sort of tried to do a late dive on the Saubers and ended up spinning round Gabriel Bortoleto. Now, for that contact at the end of the race, he did finish last. He did incur a 10-second time penalty and 2 penalty points on his licence. So he's not having a great start to his Formula One career with his crash last week in Australia. He qualified quite poorly for the sprint this weekend. His sprint race was showing signs of a competitiveness, but was quite scrappy, and then has quite a few mistakes during this qualifying session that has seen him out in P18. I know that it is very early stages, but he is going to want to sort of start tidying this up a little bit if he has any ambitions of really keeping that seat, because let's be honest, Flavio Briatore is not a man that waits around and is cutthroat, and he will drop a driver if he has to. There is the very real threat of Franco Colapinto in the wings, and Doohan is going to want to get it together pretty quickly. Oliver Bearman and Gabriel Bortoleto, I do think, just couldn't really put a clean lap together. Bortoleto, I felt, could have probably done a better job because his qualifying laps were fairly decent. He was putting in some pretty decent times. He just couldn't put together a clean lap when it was needed. Bearman's position might change. He's currently under investigation by the stewards for the potential impeding of Lance Stroll. No decision on that one yet, so we'll be keeping an eye there. And finally, another driver who, like Jack Doohan, is going to really want to pull it together is Liam Lawson, who is out in P20. Now, for the sprint race, he also qualified P20. He did finish the sprint P14, and I will say was showing signs of competitiveness. He was able to get moves done. However, they were incredibly scrappy, quite scruffy, and not the type of moves that you would be proud to have been making. There was quite a few times where he was sort of almost like bumper cars round that final hairpin. That seemed to be where he got a lot of his overtakes done, was that last hairpin after that, the back straight, the long back straight, DRS open, lunge down the inside and sort of get the overtake done there. The problem being is that quite a few times he was making contact with the cars he was overtaking and kind of budging them out the way. Not clean driving and not something that's going to go down well with the stewards, let's be honest. With his qualifying lap for the main race this morning, he faced quite a few issues and problems. He was investigated for failing to slow down under a yellow flag after Jack Doohan had spun off. He was cleared for that. There was quite a few times where he was sort of getting snaps of oversteer or understeer. He was just incredibly scrappy. His final lap, I think he started his final flying lap probably a little bit pissed off at Pierre Gasly. He had sort of really slowed down coming around that, about to come around that final corner, so that he had enough of a gap to really just sort of go for it. And Gasly was not one for hanging around and just was like, no, this is too much. And just off he went. And there is usually a sort of gentleman's agreement that you don't really do that, and it kind of annoyed Liam Lawson. So he's probably gone into that final lap a little bit miffed, and it's really not paid off. He just couldn't put a solid lap time together at all. Now, here's where the issues begin to arise, because in Australia, he qualified 18th, he did not finish the race. For the sprint, he qualified 20th, finished 14th, and he's just qualified 20th again. I can't imagine that's something that's going to be looked upon greatly by Red Bull, especially when Max is getting that car into Q3. It's currently lining up P4 for the Grand Prix. Now listen, I understand that the RB21 is incredibly tricky to drive. It's incredibly pointy on the nose, so it is sharp. It misbehaves quite a lot. Even Max Verstappen does struggle to get that car under control. However, Max Verstappen is an incredibly skilled driver and can just haul that car to places that it might not be with other drivers. I do think that you could put most of the drivers on that grid in that car and they would really struggle with it. The issue for Liam Lawson is he cannot continue to perform like this. He has to get better. He knows it as well. In his post-quali chat with Rachel Brooks in the media pen, he said he knows he's not good enough, he knows he's not fast enough, and he is struggling with the car. He needs time to get better, but he is very aware that he does not have the time, because Helmut Marko and everything like that will not stand for a whole year of this kind of performance. And it is very clear that a lot of the issues that probably plagued Checo were to do with the car, and it really knocked his confidence, and we're seeing that happen again with Liam Lawson. It is probably knocking his confidence that he's not able to perform in that car. The other problem facing Liam Lawson is Red Bull did not hire him, are not paying him a shed load of money to qualify and perform the way he's performing. They're not paying him to go out there and beat Max Verstappen. They don't need him to, but they're paying him to be somewhere close to Max and scoring them points. They cannot just rely on Max Verstappen to bring them home a Constructors' Championship. It's not going to be as easy as it was in 2023. We saw it wasn't as easy for them last year. They could only get the drivers. They need that second driver to be performing, and if Lawson is not, I just don't see Red Bull spending the amount of time on Lawson that they did on Checo. I can see them being a little bit more cutthroat. Not because Lawson is a worse driver than Checo, just because they've spent 2 years already, 23 and 24, with a driver like Checo for the majority of the year not performing. Now, in 23, he was obviously able to score enough points to get P2 in the championship. Last year, he fell off a cliff completely, and it cost them the constructors. The investors and the shareholders and the sponsors and the senior managers are not there for this team to not be winning the constructors. They're going to need that second driver somewhere in and around Max Verstappen scoring points. There is a very big target on Liam Lawson, and if he continues this performance, I do not see him finishing the year, because Red Bull just can't afford it. They've been burned badly, and I just don't think that team is willing to go through another year of that. Now, we've not even finished our full second race weekend, and there's already talk of dropping Liam Lawson. the rumours are starting and all the social media clickbaity bits are all going about dropping Liam and putting Yuki in. And Yuki is a very talented driver, but I also question how well Yuki would be able to do in that Red Bull. Now, I do agree it is worth a chance. You know, at this point, anything's worth a shot. But I do question just how well another driver would do in that car. Because I do think a lot of it is how tricky the car is to drive. But Lawson, if he wants to retain a seat in Formula One this year, he's going to have to start pulling it together. It's not even just that he doesn't have the pace, because he has said, he's like, I'm not quick enough. Which, correct, pace is massively off. He is about a second behind Max. However, he's just messy. His qualifying laps and his racecraft is incredibly messy. And it's quite a difference to what we've seen when he stepped in to replace Daniel Ricciardo those 2 times. We were all very impressed by how well he was driving, and it just seems to have completely fallen apart. Red Bull, they will not be keen to have the drivers from their sister team out-qualifying one of their main drivers. And listen, I do feel bad for Lawson, because his confidence every time he gets into that car will be shaky, and then just something happens that'll just knock his confidence a little bit more. He'll then have everyone asking him questions in the media. He'll see all the headlines of people talking about it from the F1 media, from podcasters, content creators, fans, everything being like, what is happening to Liam Lawson? And it won't do him any good, but he needs to figure out exactly what is going wrong and try and rectify it, because they cannot afford to have him getting knocked out in Q1 and, you know, not scoring any points at all. There is also going to be no further action for Oliver Bearman for the impeding of Lance Stroll, so he will remain P17. All right, and out in Q2 was in P15 Carlos Sainz, Lance Stroll, Fernando Alonso, Nico Hülkenberg, and in P11 Esteban Ocon. I have to say I am very surprised to see Carlos Sainz out in P15. Very surprised. He didn't have the cleanest of sprint races. He really struggled with his tyres and actually had to pit for new mediums. And thankfully for him, Jack Doohan did decide to make a bit of contact with the Sauber drivers at the end of the race, so that sort of helped Carlos get up to P17. But not a great sprint and not a great qualifying session. He's not comfortable in the car, and I don't know why. I don't know what it is that he's struggling with, where Alex Albon isn't, because Alex Albon made it into Q3. So I'm intrigued to find out what it is about Carlos that is unsettling him in the car, that he couldn't put together the lap. Now, as I said, a lot of the drivers really struggled to put together clean laps. There was a lot of touch and gravel and, you know, going wide at certain corners, and it is an incredibly tricky circuit to qualify, to navigate, to race. So I hope that it is just a bit of a blip, because I will be quite disappointed after what looked to be such a promising start to the year for Carlos at Williams, if this is where he's going to be sort of in that P10 to P15 area. And in Q3, the lineup is P10, Alex Albon, Yuki Tsunoda, Kimi Antonelli, Isaac Hadjar, and Charles Leclerc. P5, Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen, Lando Norris, George Russell, and Oscar Piastri. Tsunoda and Hadjar, I am a little bit surprised at. I actually think that they could have outqualified Leclerc and Hamilton. I thought that they were going to really unsettle that P4, P5, P6 area, because they were putting in banker laps. Like, out of nowhere, they were just setting these incredible lap times. And I'm so surprised by the pace of this V-carb. I'm so surprised by it. And Yuki and Hadjar seem to be incredibly comfortable in it, because when we looked at Isaac Hadjar across Q1 and Q2, one, he had some incredible speed in him. He looked incredibly comfortable. His laps were incredibly smooth and they were pretty tidy. Same with Yuki Tsunoda. The car was very responsive to the drivers, and that's very positive, and I'm very excited by this because I feel like finally the V-Carb drivers might have been given some decent machinery to really work with, and their results are very, very good. Now in the sprint, Hadjar did miss out on points. He finished P13, did finish ahead of Liam Lawson in P14, and Tsunoda finished in 6th. So that's a decent result, I would say, for Yuki Tsunoda. And I have to say, going into the Grand Prix tomorrow, I think both of these drivers are in a good spot to score some pretty decent points, to be honest. And I'm hoping that if they can get the tyres under control, which we'll talk about quickly just before we jump off, because the tyres will be a big point for tomorrow. If they can sort of retain the positions, not do too much damage to the tyres, and the strategy is decent, I don't see there being much issue for some solid points on the board for V-Carb. For Leclerc and Hamilton, I don't know what's happened between the sprint finishing and this qualifying starting, what changes they made to their setup, because I'm so surprised that Lewis Hamilton, the man that qualified on pole for the sprint, went and won the sprint, is now sitting P5 for the race. The pace just wasn't there in the Ferrari at all, and they really struggled to get some decent times in. They were always kind of sitting around that P5, P6, P7 area. I really wonder what they changed to the setups of the car when Parc Fermé ended after the sprint before it kicked in again at quali to really sort of drop them down the order a little bit. Leclerc has kind of stayed in and amongst where he sort of was for the sprint. He did finish the sprint P5. I'm just quite shocked by the drop in Hamilton because he ran a fantastic sprint quali and he ran an incredible sprint race. So interesting that he is sitting in P5, and I'm a bit concerned for them because they are going to be in the dirty air. Again, we'll come on to that shortly in a minute. Max Verstappen doing Max Verstappen things, hauling that Red Bull into places that it probably shouldn't be. We've said it before, we say it again, the man's inevitable. He is lining up on the second row. He put in a pretty decent fight during the sprint, but again, was just in that dirty air and had some problems with his tyres. Russell in P2 is a mega lap from George Russell to get that car into P2. Mega lap. And it came out of nowhere. And I'm intrigued to see what he can do going into the Grand Prix. He kind of ran his own little race in the sprint. He never really made a sort of an impression on Verstappen. He couldn't really get up to the back of him. And he, for the most part, Leclerc was dropped back a little bit from him up until those final stages where Leclerc was all over the back of him. But Russell managed to hold it pretty well. So I'm interested to see how he gets on tomorrow for the Grand Prix. And then the McLaren drivers with Lando lining up P3 and Piastri P1. McLaren is another team that, again, when I look at their sprint performance, sprint quali, sprint performance, and then the performance in this qualifying session, I feel like there's almost been two different drivers. Not so much for Oscar, but for Lando, because he qualified half a second off pole for the sprint, and that McLaren is not a car that is half a second off pole. If anything, that McLaren is on pole by 0.3 of a second. And when the sprint kicked off, Norris had quite a messy start. He made a couple of mistakes. He dropped a wheel onto the gravel. It dropped him down to P9, and he just couldn't really recover. He only managed to get past Stroll towards the latter stages, and he really struggled with his tyres. And I mean, that seems to be something that will plague everyone, but when something doesn't quite go Norris's way in the car during session, it sort of snowballs into quite a few other things. When things go right for Norris, they go right. Like, everything just goes right. And he did put together some really good laps. It just wasn't enough to get him up to P1. He also aborted his final flying lap. He wasn't really making any time, and I think the team might have thought he's going to be safe in P2, and then Russell pulled out an absolute incredible lap, mega lap, and sort of split the McLarens. But I have to say, I think Norris looked a lot more comfortable in the car this session than he has done the rest of the weekend. his teammate Piastri has just gotten his first ever pole position with two stunning laps, to be fair, because his first run in Q3 got him pole. His second run in Q3 would have also gotten him pole, and it's also the fastest lap. He broke Lewis Hamilton's record during the sprint qualifying for the fastest lap, for the lap record in Shanghai. He is lining up in perfect position to go and get his first win of this season. Now, I predicted a Piastri win. I didn't actually think he would get pole. I actually thought Lando Norris would. However, I had said that Piastri's sort of racecraft would be a bit better than Lando Norris's, and that would be where he gets his win from. And I'm sticking with my Piastri winning. And I'm sticking with the reasons why, because he has got incredible racecraft and he's got good race pace. But there's also another couple of advantages that I would bolt onto that if Piastri can keep the lead after turn one. Now, these being one, the McLaren does have a bit of a tyre advantage. It is a bit kinder to its tyres than a lot of the other teams, especially the Red Bulls, the Ferraris, and the Mercedes. The car is just overall a bit kinder, and they will need that. It is a very demanding circuit. The deg on the tyres is high, especially the front. It's a front-loaded circuit. That front left takes a real hammering through turn one, that big left-hander, turn 1, turn 2. The other big swooping left-hander of turn 12, turn 13, and the two quite sharp hairpins of turn 6 and turn 14. That left, those fronts take an absolute hammering. So the McLaren being a bit kinder on its tyres will benefit him. The other benefit that Piastri will get for his tyres is being in the clean air. Now, we've seen during the sprint race, all of the drivers really struggle in the dirty air. When you look at the likes of Max and Piastri and Charles, they couldn't really, gain on the cars in front of them because their tyres were falling off a cliff in that dirty air. Hamilton didn't face dirty air the entirety of the sprint. He had clean air and he was able to manage his tyres a bit better than the rest of the pack, and it meant that in the latter stages of the race, he could really just open up a gap to Verstappen and put a bit of pace into those tyres. So if Piastri can keep the lead, stay in the clean air, and really sort of look after his tyres with that sort of little bit of a tyre benefit that McLaren have, I see no reason that Piastri shouldn't win the race tomorrow. And I'm locking it in even harder that Oscar Piastri wins this race. I have to say, at quite a demanding circuit and quite a tough quali, there is some promising results, and I think we're in for quite a spicy Grand Prix. It's looking like it will be a two-stop race purely down to how high the deg is on the tyres, and most of the teams will have a couple of sets of mediums to work with, which will not last long. So it's how long can the drivers hold on to these tyres before they absolutely have to pit? And will some teams try and offset that by using a hard first? There's a lot going on, I can't lie, but I'm very excited. And that is everything from us. We will be back tomorrow after the Grand Prix to break it all down. Let me know your thoughts. What are your predictions? Who's winning? How is everyone going to fare tomorrow? I want to hear it all, but we will see you after the Grand Prix. Enjoy the rest of your day. Love you. Bye.